So a very warm welcome to all of you to this, our sixth and final lecture in the lecture series Ancient Adornment this fall. It is a double feature, or at least a presentation with two speakers that we have this afternoon. And before I let them have the Zoom room, I'll just introduce our two speakers to you this afternoon. Our two speakers are Laurence Darsigny-Trépanier and Dr. Anne Létourneau, both from the University of Montreal. Laurence is a PhD candidate at the Institute for Religious Studies, and in her work, Laurence uses feminist and queer theories and applies them to the Hebrew Bible. Currently, Laurence is working on a thesis on the Song of Songs, and she's also a lecturer in the program of Feminist Gender and Sexuality Studies. Anne is associate professor at the University for Religious Studies, also in Montreal. Her forthcoming book is titled Manger et mourir, Femmes entranchées dans la Bible hébraïque. I'm testing my school French right now. I'm sorry for the pronunciation. The book will be published with Peters Publishers, probably in 2025. Anne has two really interesting research projects on the go right now. Her most recent one is on biblical animals, and then she's also working on a project on gender, violence, and dress. And for those of you who are in the Oslo area or in Norway, I would like to tell you that Anne will come on a research stay here in Oslo in May 2025. So some of you will get the chance to visit her, to meet her in person. I would like to mention a couple of publications that our presenters have written. I think they will be of special interest for those of you attending this talk this afternoon. First, Laurence has a journal article in the journal Science et Esprit from 2023, and the title is beautiful. It is Comme un bœuf, il vient vers l'abattoir. As a steak, he ventures towards the abattoir. It's about animality, passivity, et partie de chasse, the hunt.
Yeah, the hunt, yeah.
Yes, in Proverbs chapter 7, verses 22 to 23. And for Anne, I would like to mention two publications, a journal article in biblical interpretation from 2021. The title is From Wild Beast to Huntress, Animal Imagery, Beauty and Seduction in the Song of Songs and Proverbs. And then a very recent book chapter in the book called Ask the Animals, Developing a Biblical Animal Hermeneutic. And the title of the book chapter is, again, a beautiful title, Miss Piggy and the Pretty Woman of Proverbs 11:22, Beauty, Animality, and Gender. So this is just for those of you who can't get enough and would like to do some reading when you leave the lecture today. Here are some prime selections, some prime cuts, perhaps I should say. The title of Anne and Laurence's talk this afternoon is Bejeweled Biblical Animals, Constructing Gender with Non-Human Bling. I'm so grateful that Anne and Laurence has accepted to give this presentation in our series. I've heard both of them give presentations before. It's always excellent. So I can't tell them how much I'm looking forward to this. And I am going to unpin myself and stick a Zoom pin in, I think, Anne, are you going to be the first?
Laurence is the first, actually.
Sorry.
Yep.
Laurence, then I'll put a pin in you. And there we go. And please, Laurence, over to you.
Thank you. And I think, Anne, you will share your screen for the
Yes,
PowerPoint.
I will do that now. Yep. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So thank you everyone for being here. As Anne reminded us, I know it is late afternoon on a Friday for you in Oslo, so thank you so much for being here. So I will start. So looking into dress and adornment in the Hebrew Bible usually brings us to focus on human bodies. But however, in our lecture, we shift our attention to bejeweled non-human animal bodies and the ways in which they contribute to the doing and undoing of gender norms in the biblical text. To do so, we explore a vast array of animals wearing prestige objects. First, I will be looking into the crowned horse in the book of Esther. And then Anne will be studying the female or beloved mare and her precious necklaces in the Song of Songs. And finally, the ornate camels of the Midianite kings. But because of time constraint, we will only touch on the proverbial pig wearing nose ring in the conclusion of our presentation, even though it was mentioned in the resume of this presentation. So with the help of gender, animal, and material studies, we explore how animal jewelry impact genders in different ways, at times as a metaphorical lever shaping femininities, and at others as a disruptor or heightener of royal masculinities. So we were inspired by the idea of following the objects as described by Bethany Joy Wagstaff in her 2017 dissertation. She herself was inspired by Westmantle and Meskel and the notion of following the material, which considers the engagement of objects with the material world and their material effect on that world. We also consider the notion of intercorporeality used by feminist biologists Linda Burke and Kirili Thompson, involving, and I quote, the co-production of meaning and movement in which the writer must become part human, as most helpful to envision the blurring of human and non-human bodies and gender. So Anne, you can skip to the first slide. Thank you. So the horse and the royal crown in Esther 6:8. So we start with the horse in the book of Esther. In chapter 6, Haman is standing before the king when the latter asked him what should be done to a man that the king wants to honor. Haman, thinking the king is actually speaking of himself, responds, and then you get the quote on the PowerPoint. For the man whom the king desires to honor, let royal garb which the king has worn be brought, and a horse on which the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal diadem has been set, and let the attire and the horse to be put in charge of one of the king's noble courtiers. And let the man whom the king desires to honor be attired and paraded on the horse through the city square, while they proclaim before him, this is what is done for the man whom the king desires to honor. So, of course, biblical scholars notice that this response given by Haman is very characteristic of the humor found in the book of Esther. Starting in chapter 3, the narrator presents Haman in a negative light and encourages the reader to stigmatize him. Therefore, when Haman demands all these lavish things to the king in chapter 6, thinking they are intended for him, the reader is entitled to laugh, knowing perfectly well that the man the king wants to honor is not Haman, but Mordechai. And of course, Haman had it coming since he's a usurper. Scholars also notice the repetition of the root malach or melech in this vignette. It appears 4 times in verse 6 and 3 times in verse 7. So because of the humorous depiction of royalty in the book of Esther, this emphasis on kinship in Haman's demand is also understood by many as being ironic, since exaggeration is indeed a characteristic of humor and irony. There is, however, one element in verse 6 that has been a point of contention in the reception history of the book of Esther, and still is today amongst biblical scholars, which is the identity of the crown wearer in this verse. On whose head has the royal crown been set? For Robert Alter, the crown is to be set on the honored man's head. And similarly, Yehuda T. Radai thinks that Haman's absurd demand is out of character even for him, and believes the crown is to be set on his own head. However, if we look at the Masoretic text syntax, there is no possible doubt. The diadem or crown is to be placed on the horse's head. This troubles many scholars who amend the Masoretic text to obtain an interpretation where Haman is picturing himself as wearing the crown, because he's actually picturing himself as being the man the king wants to honor. Ancient manuscripts of Esther also offer a different version of this verse. For example, the part of the verse mentioning the crown is omitted in the Septuagint. So the Greek translator might have found it illogical and decided to remove it. On the other hand, some argue that the horse's crown is a later addition in the Masoretic text. For example, and Anne, you can skip to the next slide. The depiction of this verse on the fresco of the Dura Europos synagogue, which is from later antiquity, places the crown on Mordechai's head, not on the horses, as you can see on the depiction on the PowerPoint. Diversity is also found in the Targumim. So the first Targum clearly agrees with the Masoretic text, the horse being the diadem wearer, whereas in the second Targum, it is less clear whose head it is supposed to be set on. Medieval interpretations of this verse are also contradictory. So for example, in his commentary on Esther 6:8, Ibn Ezra recognizes the possibility of a horse wearing crown. But on the other hand, in the Pirkei of Rabbi Eliezer, depicts a man as he realizes he shocked the king with his request. So this would explain in turn why in his next sentence, Haman only mentions the attire and the horse and voluntarily omits the crown in his description. So we cannot be completely sure of the reasons behind these divergent readings of the verse. So were different versions of the Hebrew text in circulation? Is it a later addition, or did the readers found the idea of a crown-wearing horse too ridiculous or too ironic, even for the Book of Esther, which is known for its humor and irony? And you can skip to the next slide. Another question deserves to be asked. Is the idea of a crown-wearing horse in ancient Near East really that preposterous? So Jean-Daniel Mackie refuses to amend the Masoretic text, believing that the description of a horse wearing crown is not absurd at all. Indeed, a few scholars turned to ancient Assyrian and Persian iconography and found depictions of horses wearing different types of headdresses, as you can see as displayed on the PowerPoint. Even though we agree with Salvesen that a horse's mane tied up in a ribbon, as what is probably depicted on these pictures, and you can also switch to the next one, does not quite look like a diadem or a crown. We do not agree with her suggestion to amend the Masoretic text for the horse's rider to be wearing the diadem instead of the horse. Because whether adorned horses are historical or not, what is particularly interesting in Haman's demand is that he's not asking for like a normally adorned horse, which is what is depicted on the pictures. What is to be put on the horse's head in Esther 6:8 is nothing less than the royal diadem, or keter malchut in Hebrew. Such a lavish and ironic request does not seem out of context for the Book of Esther, and we will explain now by looking more closely at the mention of this royal diadem or royal crown. So the term keter is found only in the Book of Esther in the whole Hebrew Bible, and it is mentioned 3 times in the book. So in Esther 1:11 on Vashti's head, in 2:17 on Esther's head, and in 6:8. So in our interpretation, it is on the horse's head in 6:8. So the majority of scholarly literature found in about the keter malchut in Esther focuses on the etymology of the word. While multiple hypotheses have been suggested, many scholars seem to agree that the term keter is from the Hebrew root katar, which is a verb to means to surround. And furthermore, we shouldn't be picturing a round metal crown, but a fabric headdress, like a turban wrapped around the head. According to Salvesen again, its characterization as royal in these 3 instances in the Book of Esther could indicate the quality and the color of the fabric, which would distinguish it from non-royal diadems, crown, or turbans, which were actually worn by people that were not necessarily royalty at the time. And now what can be said about the keter malchut as a gendered object? Most biblical scholars agree that the royal diadems worn by kings were distinct from the ones worn by queens. Salvesen, in her historical investigation of the nature of this headdress in Esther, doesn't believe the author had in mind the upright tiara that was worn by Persian kings, as queens were not allowed to wear it. So in her opinion, the author of Esther wouldn't have used the same term to describe Vashti's and Esther's headdresses and the king if the latter was indeed the upright tiara, because it is the same expression every time. It's always just Keter Malchut. This gender distinction of headdresses seems indeed to have also been of importance to the Greek translator, as they rendered the expression in Esther 2:17 as diadonia tu genakeion, which would translate as like a female diadem. So there's a precision that what Esther is wearing is a female diadem. Furthermore, if the horse is deprived of this royal diadem in the Septuagint, Mordechai is explicitly given one in an edition found in chapter 8, verse 15. His headwear also differs from the ones worn by Vashti and Esther. He is wearing a purple linen diadem as well as a golden crown, as you can see on the PowerPoint. As Christine de Troyer writes, and I quote, "I suppose that the translator did not want to give the same symbol of power to Esther and maybe Vashti as he did to Mordechai. Mordechai receives a royal garment, but not a royal crown. He simply receives a golden crown and a purple linen diadem. Women can only have a diadem, preferably a diadem of women, on their heads. So Vashti and Esther receives a diadem, which could be a symbol of a different kind of power. It seems the translator stressed the differences between characters." End of quote. So even if the Troyer attributes this distinction to a possible Hebrew vorlage, we believe the lack of distinction between the headdresses in the Masoretic text is interesting when it comes to the study of gender in Esther. As Holly Thompson argued in her thesis, the Book of Esther presents the potential of a genderqueer reading because of its carnivalesque depiction of power and gender roles. If Thompson's conclusion about Esther and Vashti is that they do not conform diligently to the gender binary, then we could question if the crown is effectively a gendered item in the Book of Esther, or at least in the Masoretic text of Esther, because the Septuagint seems to be pretty different. So as a gender ambiguous object, the royal crown is blurring the binary between male and female in the Masoretic text of Esther, as queens are possibly wearing male symbols of royal power. Or at the very least, we can argue that the crown is a gender-neutral symbol of power in this book. Grossman suggested that the expression "on whose head a royal diadem has been set," which appears both in Esther 2:17 and 6:8, is connecting the two stories. So Esther's replacement of Vashti in 2:17 announces Haman's desire to replace the king in 6:8. Although there seems to be a weakness in Grossman's reading, if Esther in 2:17, if in Esther 2:17 the royal crown is on Esther's head, indicates that she is replacing Vashti, then the one replacing the king in 6:8 should be the horse because it's on his head. So the crown is set on the horse's head and not Haman's. We are aware that the king's clothes, accessories, throne, as well as horse, were an extension of the king himself and of his power in ancient Near East. And this is why the usurper wishes to put on the clothes, the royal clothes, so to impersonate the king and claim his power. So even though we know Haman is the usurper in this vignette, what could it mean for the royal crown to be put on the horse's head before the honored man gets to be clothed in the royal garb? Maybe power dynamics and gender norms aren't the only customs that are transgressed in the Book of Esther. And perhaps the hierarchy between human and non-human is questioned too. So we now will move on from Esther to the Song of Songs, as Anne will continue our exploration on adorned horses in the Hebrew Bible.
Thank you, Laurence. So we continue with the horse. So this second section of our lecture focuses on the woman mare simile of Song 1, line 11. I'm especially indebted to the beautiful chapter entitled Deconstructing Horses, co-written by Francis Landy and Maria Metzler, and an edited volume from 2019. So in Song 1:9, a simile compares the beloved woman to a mare amongst Pharaoh's chariots. And the following verses emphasize the jewelry adorning the woman mare. And an article dedicated to animal poetry, Anna Strömmen contends that animals in the song, and I quote, signify both the heterogeneous otherness of animals, but also of the loved other, indeed of every other. So this Derridean emphasis on otherness is an opportunity to highlight the fluidity of representation in Song of Songs, and the fact that adornments construct multiple beautiful bodies through metaphors and similes. So in what follows, I suggest that the woman mare's adornments function like what I call a poetic prism, whose reflection produce plural bodies that will not fit neatly inside gender and species categories. So the translation I propose that you can see on the screen is, of course, a work in progress. It would have been interesting to present two translations in order to really flesh out the bi or multi-directionality of metaphor, its reversibility and reciprocity. And here, Francis Landy's work on metaphor simile is essential. In his most recent books on the poetry of Isaiah, he writes, simile may be a means for creating alternative stories or realities which may counter the first. It allows for the return or at least exploration of the repressed. So I keep these many alternate realities in mind when translating and investigating the common jewelry of woman and mare in this passage. So the translation. To a mare or to my mare amongst Pharaoh's chariots, I compare you, my friend. Your cheeks are pretty with coils, your neck with pearls, coils of gold we will fashion for you with speckles of silver. A few observations on the translation, especially the items of adornment, of course. So, and then I'll switch between the following slide and the previous one. So first, the torim that you can see appears twice in verses 10 and 11. So the torim, there is a few rare occurrences of this word in the Hebrew Bible. An identical Hebraic root refers to turtle doves, which explain the Septuagint and Latin versions comparing the lover's cheeks to a dove. So while the vast majority of scholars pay no attention to these ancient translations, it is at least worth mentioning since these birds are found in the song in 2:12, including in similes to describe the female lover's eyes in 4:1. So many would consider absurd the image of a woman mare whose cheekbones are adorned with turtle doves, since it interrupts the narrativity necessary to tell the song's story. However, as many attentive readers of the song have noted, including Cheryl Exum, and I want to mention her extraordinary work on the Song of Songs, this poetic work resists any attempt to flesh out one plot. Its images block our narrative impulse. So let's now turn to the other occurrences of the word tor. In the book of Esther, chapter 2, verses 12 and 15, the translation by turtle dove seems impossible, of course. So the occurrence refer to the turn of each woman in the harem, including Esther, when it is their time to go to the Persian king. It involves a movement in space, which seems to be the meaning of the verb root tor, to explore, to spy, to do your round. In the case of Song 110:11, the movement is embedded into a material object, which amplifies the beauty of the beloved mare. Most people translate this plural object torim as jewelry, which is easily understandable when considering the mention of metal, gold, and silver in verse 11. However, many biblical scholars offer very cautious translation, opting for ornaments. Others take the beau risque of translating the word with a more specific item of jewelry, insisting on the roundness or the dangling aspect of the object. Most agree on the idea of an earring, especially dangling ones. Other authors like Brian Galt and Francis Landy imagine adornments hanging down from the woman's headdress on her cheeks. So Landy translates the torim as circlets and suggests the idea of a metal headgear or headband or headdress. So this opens another fascinating translation avenue involving hairdo as a whole other sphere of adornments. So these circlets could also be understood as a braid or a braided object, including the strand of a wig. I like the idea of keeping this ambiguity in the translation with the word coil, which can work for a metal ornament, especially an earring, as well as a twist of hair from a specific hairstyle, including a well-manicured mane. So the word chachudzim is also not without difficulties. So it's a hapax legomenon, and its only occurrences is found in Song 110. It is most often translated as a row necklace or a collar of some sort with strings of beads, pearls, or jewels. So Galt connects this word with similar occurrences in Aramaic and Arabic. One of the Tel Arad Ostraka has the term cheretz or chertza, which could be identified with a big bead or an amulet. And the same verb root is also found in the Targum of Job at Qumran to signify the idea of piercing an object. This Aramaic data makes the idea of necklace beads, possibly amuletic, convincing enough. So as can be easily discerned from the previous discussion, most translators enroll these objects in a strictly human and feminine referentiality. Yes, many also mention the equine domain of reference, also thinking the ornaments as luxurious objects of saddlery for the mare, a harness, a bridle, a frontlet, blinkers, etc., to be associated with pharaoh and Egyptian kingship in general. However, this rarely comes true in the translations, which stay mainly focused on human beauty. Yet, as Amy Rebecca Ganslow contends, elite horses often wore impressive harnesses, including in bronze, alabaster, and ivory. And then we can ask, could such a piece of horsestack be understood as beautifying the lover's cheeks or face? So the Neo-Assyrian ivory horse frontlet from 9th or 8th centuries BCE Nimrud that is found in the Metropolitan Museum is an especially interesting case of horse jewelry to connect with the song. Its depiction of a naked woman with lions around her, front and center, emphasizes the shape-shifting quality of the simile of Song 1911, which merges woman and horse through and with the adornment. While it does not affect this translation, Ottmar Kiel, like Gensel, also reflects on Torim as, and I quote, cheek bands on a horse's bridle. He also links the silver nikudot of verse 11, come back here, to Assyrian and Egyptian bridles decorated with dots of the same metal. So the torim that I translate with the word coils could also be understood as dangling from an equine frontlet. And similarly, the pearls or chachudzim could be hanging from a bridle. I do think that the translation should at least hint at this entanglement of human and non-human images produced by the simile without stabilizing the meanings once and for all. I now turn to the main interpretation of the simile in Song 1911. So here I follow Brian Galt and Danilo Verde, who in their respective monographs have recently offered excellent syntheses of the main interpretive threads on these verses. So there's three main threads, non-exclusive and often combined, of course, that can be identified. The aesthetic one, the erotic one, and the military one. First, the aesthetic dimension, I think in the simile is, of course, undisputable. Contrary to what some might argue, the woman's beauty is clearly celebrated through these equine simile. It is a complementary association and in no way an insult, as some have advanced. So while rarer in ancient Near Eastern and Levantine sources, the comparison of a human to a horse is not an isolated trope in the Mediterranean region. Galt and Verde draw from many different sources, including Egyptian love poetry, the Ugaritic myth of Shapsh and the mare, as well as numerous examples from Greco-Roman literatures. The items of jewelry take part in the beautification of the woman mare, a very ornate beauty, which the use of the root na'a also highlights in verse 10. Some biblical scholars see this beautification process as a kind of objectification of the woman mare body, soon to be worn down by more items of jewelry in verse 11. Arbel contends that the adornments, the words and the gaze of the male lover confine the woman mare to a metallic prison. And she recalls the words of Landy, his translation, where he talks about the woman mare as concealed in silver. Second, the erotic interpretation, which often extends the aesthetic one, is adopted by some and rejected by others, who seem to forget that they are reading the Song of Song, an assemblage of poems permeated with and fashioned by desire. So Galt rightly reminds us that the song's images are far from univocal. The woman mare is a clear object of desire in the words of the male lover. This brings many feminist scholars to insist on the negative side of erotic desire here, involving a desire to possess the woman mare, which Arbel identifies, and I quote, as a submissive object of appetite. The strong rejection of the erotic understanding of the simile by some has a lot to do with Marvin Pope's erotic and military interpretation, developed in his 1977 commentary and discussed ever since. So Pope's interpretation of this passage is built on the biography of Amenemhab, an officer of Pharaoh Thutmose III. So his funerary inscription relates the military strategy of the king of Kadesh used against the pharaoh. So a mare in heat was sent amongst the male horses of the Egyptian army to engender chaos. Is a similar logic at work in the simile? It is indeed surprising to find a mare hitched to a chariot, since we know stallions and geldings were privileged on the battlefield. While Pope's hypothesis is quite controversial, and it is still widely discussed, and does bring us to take seriously the military aspect of verse 9. As highlighted by Gault and Verde, the word sus, here the unique feminine susa, and rigve, chariots, found together often signify war, but also the kingships made and unmade on the battlefield. All these horses, including the one hitched to the rigve, are doing the work of war. Danilo Verde thinks of the woman mare amid these working war horses. He contends, and I quote, "The woman is described as both powerful, unstoppable, and an elegant and regal military mare." While he insists on the noble and chaotic power she embodies, other scholars like Arbel and Turner offer opposite interpretations that emphasize the submission and passivity of the woman mare. But which one is it? And do we need to choose between these options? I would like to go back to the simile and propose another way to tackle or go beyond these dichotomies. I would indeed subject that the adornments, either imagined as human or equine objects, function as a prism at the art of the simile, refracting and engendering a diversity of bodies and meanings when reading Song 1:9-11. So we can imagine many things: a warrior mare, a woman clad in turtle doves and amulets, a beaded or speckled mare, a type of centauride, a female centaur, a beloved woman with a curly mane and heavy necklaces made of gold and silver, and so on. There is more than one story to be told about the woman as mare. Tales of freedom and wild strength, of male gaze and bodily appropriation, but also many more. The Torim and the Chachutzim materialize two specific body parts of the hybrid character: her neck, tzawarech, and her cheeks or jaw, lecha yagir. Again, they can create the body in different ways. Many biblical human and non-human necks and jaws are brought to mind, from the strong jaw of the untamable Leviathan to the ivory or ornate necks of women, the lover of Psalm 7:5, and the princesses of Judges 5:30. Power, beauty, and vulnerability are some of the meanings foregrounded through these intertextual connections. I contend that these adornments in Song 1:9-11 function as a metaphoric prism which avail the exploration of all these interpretative beams. So the way this adornment device connects mare and woman in the simile impacts, of course, their hybrid gender performances. Horses are famous participants in the construction and performance of royal and warrior masculinities in the ancient Near East. And it is true that the Susati is identified with male characters, the lover, and Pharaoh in the passage under study. However, the adornments connect her mostly and mainly with the female beloved's body, bejeweled like a queen. It is with her that the military mare inhabits the simile. We should also keep in mind that this is not the woman's first non-human companionship in the song, and it's not the last. In the previous verses, she's a shepherdess to many sheep, including her lover, as Jared Beverly has recently suggested. Is she now to be imagined as a warrior queen on her battle horse, like goddess Anat on her mount? The simile can also evoke a beautiful hybrid centaurus-like body. It certainly gives us the opportunity as readers to envision an array of human and non-human hybrid bodies and genders, as well as very diverse companionships. So now I turn to the dromedaries, the camels. Okay. Until now, our focus has been mainly on equine jewelry. However, they are not the sole non-human animals adorned with trimmings in the Hebrew Bible. The book of Judges provides us with a very interesting case of camel ornaments in chapter 8, verses 21 and 26. So dromedaries, animals owned by the Midianite kings Zebach and Salmuna, are said to be dispossessed of the Saharonim in the Anakot, decorating their long neck. Okay, not there. Decorating their long neck by Gideon. The second item of jewelry is introduced in the larger act of looting by Gideon and his claiming of parts of the Israelite spoils to fashion an ephod out of all the precious metals harvested. We will come back to this point in a bit, but first let's look at the larger literary context and which these biblical dromedaries happen on the scene in the Gideon story. When camels first appear in Judges 6:5, accompanying the Midianites, but also the Amalekites and the Kedemites, they are compared to locusts on account of their fantastic number and the land devastation they cause. Here it is unclear if the camels are used to raid the territory of it, or if their intense foraging of agricultural land is at stake. The camels found in Judges 8 might simply be pack animals transporting goods for trade over long distances and difficult terrain, rather than part of the Midianite camelry, which is a new word that I learned. Nevertheless, with the camels in Judges 8, while they might not be soldiers, they are clearly working animals at the service of the Midianite invasion, and they are on the losing side. Their owners, Kings Zebah and Salmunna, have just been captured by Gideon and his men. The non-human animals attend the last conversations between the Midianite kings and Gideon, as well as the executions of their rulers and masters in Judges 8:18-21. As many biblical scholars have noticed, the construction of royal and warrior masculinity is at stake in this scene, including, as Kelly Murphy and Stephen Wilson rightly highlight, issues of kinship and honor. We now learn in this passage that the Midianites have killed some of Gideon's brothers, whom he wishes to avenge. He wants the two kings to die at the end of his son Jether, his firstborn. However, the young man fails to accomplish the deed and to participate in this intergenerational building of triumphant and very violent masculinity. The young man is scared. The Midianite kings then call on Gideon to do his own bidding, another what many have identified as a kind of proverb, Ka'ish geburato, like the man is manly or heroic strength, which Jacques Sasson freely translate as for manhood defines the person. Most seem in agreement that the warrior's strength is at the center of this pronouncement on masculinity. Wilson contends that in this way, and I quote, the Midianite kings are commenting on the frightened Jether's tender age in contrast to strong manhood. But what of the camels in this whole setting? Gideon seems to rapidly comply with the enemy king's demand and definition of ideal masculinity. He kills them and then starts looting their royal object of prestige, as well as those of their non-human companions. His verbal refusal to rule his fellow Israelites is the only thing that interrupts his harvesting of spoils, which then resumes, and it takes a lot of space in the story. So I draw your attention, especially on the following section of verses 21, 24, and 26. First, he took the saharonim that were on the neck of their camels or dromedaries. That's verse 21. Later on, he requests every Israelite to give him a ring, nezem, of their spoils, gold rings from the Ishmaelites, which seems to be confused or identified with the Midianites, and they consent to his demand. He then has at his disposal an enormous quantity of gold from the rings, 1,700 shekels, in addition to the objects he already gleaned from the dead Midianite rulers. And then there's this verse 6, besides the saharonim, the netifot, the purple clothes, which are on the kings of Midian, and besides the anakot, which are on the necks of their camels. So today we're not trying to cover all these objects. There's too many. We're just going to focus on the ones worn by the camels. But Gideon then turns this enormous amount of precious metal into an ephod, some kind of ill-defined cult object in the context of this story that leads the Israelites to turn away from Adonai. So first, the saharonim. I stay here, sorry. So first the saharonim. So only 3 occurrences of this word are found in the Hebrew Bible. 2 in Judges 8:21-26 on the bodies of both the Midianite kings and their camels, and 1 on the necks of the daughters of Zion in Isaiah 3:18, and a long poetic list of items of jewelry and clothing. So the daughters are violently stripped of all these material objects that used to cover their bodies. They are shamed and reduced to captivity by Adonai himself in Isaiah. So in agreement with the ancient versions, most biblical scholars agree that the saharonim, possibly related to the moon god Sa'ar, refer to little moons or crescent, possibly amuletic pendants. So such iconography could be connected to the cult of Adonai, of course, but the fact that these are found on the necks of both Midianite camels and kings opens another possibility. While we have very little to go on regarding the location and identity of Midian outside the Hebrew Bible, the name appears in Taymanite script and one inscription found in northwest Arabia dating from the first millennium BCE. Many scholars seem to agree that Midian should be situated in this region of the Arabian Peninsula near the Gulf of Aqaba. So ancient Arabia is, of course, closely associated to the domestication of the one-hump camels or dromedaries in the Iron Age. And this other northwestern Arabian context, crescent moon iconography, could then be tied with local gods, as the stone cube from the middle of the first millennium BCE that you see on the screen illustrates from Taima, detailing an offering to the god Salm. And you see the crescent moon, I hope you can see it, on the cube there. So the fact that camels and kings were the little moons in Judges 8 suggests that they participate in the same cultural and royal assemblage. As mentioned by Laurence, horses are often appraised as inextricably bound to the bodies of kings in the ancient Near East. I contend that the camels can be appraised in a similar fashion as taking part in the makeup of royal Midianite masculinities. So the lunar amulets connect royal human and non-human bodies. While the kings have the last word on what their ideal masculinity ought to be in verse 21, their defeat and slaughter also contribute to their unmanning. The camels are not simply bystanders in this scene. This gendered and gendering violence also happens to them. So as Gideon partly takes over the performance of royal masculinity, however imperfectly, with the killing of the enemy sovereigns, his becoming king is also signified through his extreme looting in verses 21 and 24-26, including his claim to an extra share of rings, nezamim, which were acquired by the Israelites, from his fellow Israelites, which is the equivalent, according to Jackson, to approximately 45 pounds of gold, which is a lot. So in a recent article on nezamim in the Hebrew Bible, Susanna Reeves, who was part of this series, offers a very insightful interpretation of these specific rings. She contends, and I quote, "It seems likely that these nezamim were acquired by the Israelites directly as a result of taking captive Midianite, Ishmaelite women and children." She argues that this act of dispossession in and of itself contributes to breaking down the kinship units of each and every captive. I think the camels must be considered in the same way as non-human captives of Gideon and the Israelites, whose Midianite royal identities are being violently erased. Further, I would suggest that they are feminized as Gideon strips them of their ornaments, the Saharonim and the Anakot, just like the daughters of Zion in Isaiah 3:16-24. There are only 3 occurrences of the word Anak in the Hebrew Bible, in Judges 8:26, Proverbs 1:9, and Song 4:9. It clearly designates a necklace or a collar or the elements of this ensemble. In Song 4:9, biblical scholars translate the singular Anak as the unit of a full necklace, bead, pendant, jewel. Such shiny beads or gems are also found in the necks of the camels before being stolen. Moreover, the camels are not simply feminized through this association with the song's female beloved. I contend that the emphasis on their necks, tzoreh, in both verses 21 and 26, also function in that way, characterizing them as captives and gendering them as feminine. Many occurrences of the word tzawar, neck, in the Hebrew Bible involve a type of yoke, an object involved in forced labor and enslavement. We also already mentioned the woman mare's adorned neck in Song 110, also qualified as ivory or tower-like in Song 4:4 and 7:5. While Joseph in Genesis is given a gold chain, linen clothes, and a signet ring by Pharaoh, the camel in Judges 8:21-26 are stripped of their metal identities. Many meanings circulate around human and non-human necks, and the gestures of decking and stripping these body parts, from shame to beautification, from social inclusion to violent exclusion. In the case of the camels, Judges 5:30 constitute an illuminating intertext while sexual violence is at the forefront. The princesses accompanying Sisera's mother are about to become war captives as the poetry focuses on their uteruses and their necks. Here's the second part of verse 30. Spoils of dyed fabrics for Sisera, spoils of dyed fabrics, embroidered cloth, a dyed fabric with double embroideries for the necks of the spoils. While the intimate but violent actions around the necks are different in Judges 5:30 and 8:21-26, the wrapping and the divesting both take part in the shaping of women and camel bodies as war booty. Just like the Canaanite princesses, the camels are disconnected from nobility. Their involvement in royal masculinities is over. As working animals, their status also changes. The specific handling of their jewelry and necks ties them to the vulnerable bodies of captive women. The Saharonim and the Anakote create an intercorporeal space connecting these bodies beyond the human and non-human divide. To conclude, we hope that these three little explorations have shown how the study of ancient adornment should also investigate the items of jewelry and dress of non-human animals in the Hebrew Bible. So focusing on adorned horses and camels brings us to consider how the objects that take part in the fashioning of ethnic, class, and gender identities are indeed not only found on human bodies. Furthermore, they can function in a plethora of ways to produce both subversive and normative genders. The three examples we looked at dealt more specifically with the domains of kingship and queenship. There's other texts we could look at. For example, the animal saying found in Proverb 11:22, where a nose ring wearing pig is paired with a tasteless pretty woman, which would bring us in a very different direction, as the metaphor builds an unexpected companionship while also blurring the frontier between human and non-human animals. This, however, is a discussion for another time. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So please join me in applauding our presenters, either with real hands or Zoom hands. This was delightful. Thank you. And now we have plenty of time for questions, comments, discussion. So please, everyone, go ahead. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you can either raise your Zoom hand or your real hand, or you can write to me in the chat and I will let you speak. And if you are in a place where it's possible for you to turn on your camera, then it would be much appreciated. I think it's nice for Laurence and Anne to know that there are real people out there as well and not just blank screens. I think I would like to start us out with a question, actually, if I may. And in a way, it's for you both, so you'll have to see how you can try to answer. But first of all, I would say that I appreciate your approach to the Song of Songs very much, and I really appreciate that you try to maintain the ambiguity in the text, because I think it's such a crime almost if we try to freeze this multiple layers of meaning into just one thing. I think it's certainly not what the authors had in mind, I'm sure. So I really like this multiple reading and multiple option. But your presentation made me think about why animals are used in this way, and sort of how they can be used both as vehicles of something aesthetic, beautiful, praising, and at the same time also something slightly absurd, a little bit like the pig with the nose ring, and also perhaps borderline absurd in Esther as well. So I was just wondering, when you've been working on these examples, have you gotten a sense of how do we know how to interpret these animal images and metaphors in the right direction, so that we understand when beauty is the purpose or description, and when sort of comedy and absurdity is does it make sense?
Yeah. That's a really good question. Laurence, do you want to go first, or should I? Okay. That's a question I'm asking myself throughout and that's why I wanted to keep it open. For example, for Song 1911 is because I think there's that multi-directionality, especially when you're working with metaphors and simile, is important. And I don't think there's one direction that does the whole work of this is just aesthetic or this is just absurd. I think there's a mix of like possible connections. And that's what I like about the idea of the prism, is that it can really offer yes, there is certainly, and I don't think we cannot avoid the power relations in Song 1911. It's there. It's a mare situated in a chariot assembles, and it's the male lovers describing her, and there's this whole idea of owning the horse also, and so the power relations are there. And I really like the work of Susanna Miller for that, because she started developing this idea of a kind of intersectional approach of text, where she includes species also, and gender and class and everything. And she she does both things, like also looking at the power relations and the word in French is appropriation of animal bodies, because most animals that are represented are also working animals. They're working for humans. So all these power relations, but also looking at other potential openings. And I don't want to talk too much about the pig, which if not, I'm going to start talking only about the pig. But many have seen Proverbs 11:22 as mostly talking about the prohibition and the disgust inspired by the pig, the food taboo, and my piece I've tried to go in another direction, to think about woman and pig as companions, which is not completely impossible. If you look at archaeozoology, there were pigs in the Kingdom of Israel they found there's like bones assemblage, which means that there was some kind of daily lives for some people with pigs. So using Donna Haraway's idea of a companion species can also be possible with pigs. So that's what I try to argue. But also there's all these power relations with animals who are part of the family, but also hierarchically inferiors. So I think we need to open up multiple possibilities. I think it's never just aesthetic, or it's never just, well, absurd. Then I would let Laurence talk about Esther, which is not my, I don't know, Laurence, what do you think?
Well, maybe there's something that Anne from Oslo, not the other Anne, when you said, how do we know if we interpret it the right way? I don't know if I would say there is like a right or wrong way to interpret it when it comes to especially like humor and irony, because when I was reading a little bit on like irony in the Hebrew Bible, it's really hard to understand when a text is actually being ironic, because it's very much in like the author's intention, if there is irony or not. And I don't think we can really try to go back to the author's intention. In my way, I don't think I can really try to reconstruct this intent. And irony and humor is also very much in the tone, which we don't really have when it comes to like written text. And when I found interesting when I was reading on the horse, because there's not much that has been said on that horse. A lot of people were agreeing that Esther is being a book that is very like ironic, and the depiction of royalty is very much exaggerated. But when it came to the crown on the horse, biblical scholars were trying to be like very strict, and they were trying to really reconstruct the historical the historical object that was put on the horse's head. And that's why they couldn't imagine that the writer would use the same term to describe the crown that only a king, a male king, could wear for Esther, Vashti, and a horse. But if they agreed that the whole book is like a carnivalesque depiction of gender roles and power roles, then it didn't seem like wrong for me to assume that the horse was actually wearing the crown, and also that Esther and Vashti were probably wearing something that was only worn by male king before. So I don't know if there's like a right or wrong way to interpret these things, but I don't think it was going against the idea that Esther is actually trying to be fun and to mess a little bit with like convention of the time. So I don't know if I'm responding to your question.
No, absolutely. And I agree with you actually that the question was a little bit off in a way, but you did that maybe it's not the right question to ask how we can understand it the right way. But no, so it was brilliant. But I think I'm also fascinated by how well this imagery actually works. I mean, how effective it is to use animal imagery in these texts. So I think that's just what fascinates me. But I totally buy your argument that it's the horse wearing the diadem and not the man. And I don't want to hog the floor, so please let me know if anyone would like to jump in. But I was just thinking regarding horse ornaments, I totally understand why for Esther looking towards Mesopotamia and Persia would be more relevant. But when you were presenting the Esther example to us, I couldn't stop thinking about the reliefs from the Battle of Kadesh, where Ramses' horse is wearing something that I can only describe as a plumage. So basically a feathered headdress, almost conical in shape. That's quite impressive. So and that so I think there's iconography from Egypt that as well that one could bring into this, even if it's sort of in the world of the text, not as geographically correct, of course. Anyone else who would like to ask a question or make a comment? If you don't, I'll just continue. It's a thread. But I was thinking about the intersectional perspective as well, with, in a way, going back to the Song of Songs, that the there is, I think, a huge significance also in the interchange between domestic and non-domesticated animals, where, I mean, it's not a completely clear-cut sort of a tendency, but the man tends to be described with wild animals, gazelles and deers and so on, whereas the domestic, both the domestic nature and domesticated animals is more towards the woman, generally speaking. So there's definitely something hierarchical going on there as well, I think.
That's true. And I think it could, it's not identified to the woman, but in Song 4-8, she goes in the mountains to join the lions and the leopards.
Yes.
And it's maybe the one moment of wild connection. That would be interesting to look into further, because maybe it's like the exception, this wild connection of the, otherwise she's described and connected more to domesticated animals.
Yes, you're right. No, I think actually that would be incredibly interesting. Like
Yeah.
I think I mentioned to you the last time we spoke that I just translated the Song of Songs for the
yes
for the new Danish Bible translation that will appear in 100 years. But there I try to sort of keep track of when are we dealing with sort of horticultural vegetation and non-horticultural, and there's almost no non-horticultural vegetation in the Song of Songs, and then also trying to keep track of the animals and whether they're domesticated or not. And I think you're exactly right. The leopards and the lions, that's sort of her wild moment.
It is, and I see it as her trying to escape something, but she comes back really quick. But there's something there. Thank you for bringing that up. I didn't look into that. Thank you.
I look forward to seeing where you end with it.
Because Song 1-9 is one piece of the puzzles, but there would be so many others to look into. Yeah,
and I think there could be something really interesting in just sort of tentatively mapping it and just seeing how it turns out. Yeah, sure. Guadalupe, please go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you. I was just, I was gonna say something, but then you started talking about the wild animals, and then just that in connection to women and wild animals is the Lilith also, whatever.
Oh, yes.
Whatever the Lilith is.
Yes.
It hangs out with the wild animals also.
That I'm so glad that you're bringing this up, Guadalupe. I at SBL I just did a presentation about Lilith, so I'm very interested in like the wildness of the thing too. So yeah, definitely. And those, that would be a nice thing to contrast the animals in Song of Songs and the animals, the wild animals in Isaiah 13 and 34. That would be very where Lilith is found. Yeah, that's a nice connection. Yeah, thank you.
The other thing I was gonna kind of say is I come from a much later period, so maybe it has nothing to do with, but the idea of ornaments on horses, in the medieval period, I find it in the Islamic realm, it has like an amuletic efficacy. So it was like you would put amulets, metal jewels on horses for protection in battle. So I don't know if it has anything to do with what you have, but it is animals wearing some kind of like, necklaces, or well, like they were things attached to the bridle or to the, but
that's really interesting. I'm just thinking about the camels in particular with the little moons, which could be connected to deities. And I mentioned really fast the idea of amulet, but that could also confirm
that's
the
why
idea
you
that
use
their
it,
actual part amulet. Yeah,
or maybe it's an
could confirm the
efficacy
idea.
thing.
Yeah, that's it. But it could also confirm that they're part of a camelry, that they're actual military camels and not just doing. So that's really interesting. Thank you. That's another thing to look into. Oh, wow. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. I think we have to make sure that the term camelry is now going to be widely used.
Yes, that's my big discovery of the last 2 weeks.
And you heard it here first. So Katja has a question in the chat, and I don't know if, Katja, is it possible for you to ask the question yourself, or are you in a place where you can't?
Sorry.
Hi, please go ahead.
Apologies. I'm at home. I've done some work on Ezekiel 16, where a lot of jewelry is used in relation to the female, which represents Jerusalem. And I've noticed that some scholars have pointed out that even though jewelry and clothing are very valuable and expensive there, they also represent some form of imprisonment or some form of constraints for the woman. And more specifically, lots of jewelry is used in reference to the woman's head. And I've come across some studies where people talk about how beheading a woman through different means, either, metaphors or whatever, kind of robs a female subject of her intelligence, identity, and whatnot. And a little bit of that happens in Ezekiel 16. And so my question for you, presenters, is there any significance of where on which body parts those valuable objects or jewelry are placed on animals, and then how they're used in reference to human objects in your text? Have you looked into the significance of those body parts, like where exactly jewelry goes, those valuable objects go? Just a thought.
That's a really good question. Laurence, do you want to go first, or?
Well, yeah, like you said, Anne, that's a really good question. I did not really think of it because, well, the crown is worn on the head, whether it's the horse, the woman, or the king, or whatever the other male person is supposed to wear it. So, and generally, I think the head is kind of like associated with the power, which is why the crown is on the head. But I haven't looked into like if there's something specific to the horse wearing it on its head or somewhere else on the body. But maybe I can try to look that up in the next research. Thank you.
Because you've, sorry for interrupting, you've talked about bridles, you've talked about,
Yes.
all placed on animals' necks and so on. And so I thought maybe there's something about those body parts that could be explored. I don't know. Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right. I do think about the studies of Amy Rebecca Gansel and the fact that when you have aesthetic representation to represent beauty, it almost always focuses on the head for women. With I'm thinking about all the women at the window panel, like representation and stuff. I'm starting to look into, because jewelry makes some body parts appear more than others. And that's the case for Song 1911. It makes her neck and her cheeks appear, or jaw. So there's something there that you can say, well, it's the beauty ideals that you focus on the face, but you could also focus on the constraints. And there's a lot of archaeologists that specialize on jewelry that I've mentioned, and I think that's maybe what you pointed at, that the jewelry worn by women seems to have been heavier and more constraining. I'm thinking about the double, is it bracelets that women used to wear that they found in many tombs? And I think so it's also it's not just beautification, there's also maybe some kind of constraint, and I think with the metaphor of the mare we could delve more into that. And the same about well, not the same, but for the dromedaries it's the neck that appears, it's the focus on the neck that is really, so there's also this both like beautification of noble royal animals, but also all the enslavement and forced work that the animals are put into. And that's what I was trying, I'm not sure I really succeeded in that, but that's what I was trying to connect. That's why I was trying to connect it also with women captives, like war captives, because Judges 5:30, maybe I was a bit all over the place, but really focuses on two body parts of the women, their uteruses, which makes them be reduced completely just to their reproductive system, and hints, well, it's not even a hint, it's clearly indicating sexual violence, and necks. So there's again this focus on the neck that would be interesting to delve into way more. And with all the work on body metaphor that has been done recently, I think that's really a good idea to dig deeper. So thank you so much for your question, because I'm gonna keep thinking about it.
And look at the quote that I pasted there.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, because that reflects what you
yeah.
said. Thank you.
That's super interesting. Thank you so much.
From Albert Schwartz.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I'm removing the female head literally relieves woman of both identity and voice and reduces her to a mere sexual and reproductive body, but there are other less obvious forms of beheading. The eroticization of the female head extends the body, turning the head into an alluring and sexually provocative organ. In this way, the female head becomes part of a woman's genitalia. And I wonder if which Eilberg Schwartz texted this from, Katja?
I'll give you a full reference in a second.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very interesting. And just sort of picking up on this, we had the Racontre meeting in Helsinki this summer, where Amy Gansel was also presenting on Neo-Assyrian kings and queens. We had a session on the sort of the display of power and how to display power also iconographically and ritually. And one of the things that we talked about there as well is also exactly as you said, and the sort of the unpleasantness of wearing this kind of royal adornment, how it's heavy, it's restrictive, it's constraining, it's warm. So there is almost in sort of performing this kind of royal power, whether it's masculine or feminine royal power, there is a huge degree of bodily discomfort and sometimes even suffering that goes with it. That's, we don't see that in the reliefs or we don't feel it when we read the text, but it's always there as a sort of as a subtext to this kind of attire as well, even to wearing a diadem. Oh, so we got the reference here. Thank you so much, Katja.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, of course.
Wow.
That's another brilliant title. Off with Her Head, The Denial of Women's Identity in Myth, Religion and Culture from 1995, edited by Albert Schwartz and Doniger. Brilliant. Thank you.
That looks great. Thank you.
It does. So we have a few minutes left before we've reached the end of our time. So there's still time for a few comments or questions if you'd like. As we said, it is Friday afternoon. Guadalupe, please go ahead.
If nobody else has any question, I just wanted to ask quickly. You mentioned at the beginning, Laurence, a recent PhD on material methodologies. Is that, I didn't get the name. I was just wondering if you could share the name of the author with us.
Laurence Tonson.
So sorry. Yeah, in the first one, it's actually Anne showed it to me, Bethany Joy Wagstaff. 2017 dissertation. I could send you the link if you want, or maybe, Anne, do you remember the title?
Yeah, I'll put the link to the dissertation in the right here. 1 second.
It's she was a student at the University of Exeter, and
Okay.
it's a brilliant thesis.
Thank you.
It is very good. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And there's a link in the chat as well. Brilliant. Another thing that came up in the chat while you were presenting, so you probably didn't see it, was some praise for the artwork that you're using,
Yes.
and to Emma Casson.
Cusson. Yeah.
Cusson, of course. Is that tell us about Emma Cusson before we. Okay, Emma is
she's
there.
right here. She's
Wonderful.
right here. Yes.
Because I enjoyed that image very much as well. It was beautiful.
It's amazing.
Hello, Emma. Do you work in biblical studies or you just do biblical?
I did my bachelor's and I just finished my master's in religious studies, and now I'm doing a master's in information studies. So
Oh, I see. So the art is just it's a side venue or a supplement
yes.
almost. Yeah, it was beautiful.
Thank you.
Have you done many illustrations of biblical texts?
No, that was my first one.
Oh, okay. Please do some more.
Thank you.
Yes. I agree. Thank you,
Great.
Emma.
Thanks. Okay, well, it's almost the end of our time, and also the end of this lecture series. So I just want to say to those of you who were here for the first time this week, if you liked it, please visit our website. We have 3 lecture series. Ancient adornment, this one, ancient attire, and ancient attraction. So there's lots of videos and material that you can go and watch if you would like to. And for those of you who've been returning to the series several times, thank you so much for your participation. And thank you most of all to our 2 presenters today, Laurence and Anne. This was brilliant, so enlightening and interesting and inspiring. So thank you so much for spending your time with us and sharing your work.
Thank you.
And please join me in thanking them again.
Thank you so much for the opportunity and for the great discussion. Thank you, Anne, and thank you for the whole series, which is amazing. So I really advise everyone to go watch those videos because it's amazing lectures.
Thank you. That's very kind.